All right, so I'm going to be talking about planning a backpacking trip on the Florida Trail. And those of you who've attended some of my previous presentations on different hikes we've taken with the Sierra Club on the Florida Trail will know what the Florida Trail is. And many of you probably who haven't attended those meetings already know what the Florida Trail is. But it's a trail, it's a national scenic trail designated by Congress, just like the Appalachian Trail, just like the Pacific Crest Trail. And it's a trail that goes in a continuous path from the Everglades all the way up the peninsula of Florida, all the way out the Panhandle, and ends up in Pensacola. So it's about 1,100, 1,200 miles, depending on, there's a couple different routes, and some of the trails keep changing. But 1,100, 1,200 miles approximately of continuous footpath from one end of the state to the other. So it's a really great opportunity for those of us who live here to get out in nature and do some long distance hiking and backpacking. And it's a great winter hike. Just letting some people in here. So because it's sort of a counter seasonal to, let's say you're doing a northern trail or, even the Appalachian Trail, and you don't want to do winter camping. It's a great place to keep your hiking skills up during the winter, when it's really the only time you want to take a hike in Florida, at least for me, particularly when I'm camping. To me, the season for backpacking in Florida is pretty much November through March, and that's it. So anyway, I've chosen to illustrate some of my points. There's a lot of detail and technical points as far as planning this trip. But I wanted to illustrate it with some pictures that I've taken from some of my trips that I've done on the Florida Trail. So you can get an appreciation, if you don't have one already, of how diverse the landscape and the ecosystems are in the state of Florida. And that's reflected in our trail because it goes through all of the wild areas of Florida with a real representative picture of what our beautiful state really looks like. Obviously, it's not just sandy beaches, although I should have had a picture of that, but the Pensacola stretch is about 35 miles of hiking on a beach. So you even have beaches, but there's all different kinds of landscapes and terrains in Florida, as you all know. So this here is a picture of Big Cypress, which is where the trail begins, in the Big Cypress National Preserve, I think it is. And that's basically in the Everglades. And it's a swamp, so it's 30 miles of walking through water in normal conditions. If it's a little drier, you have some stretches that are above water, but mostly it's just walking through a swamp. And there's some islands, like you can see some of these higher elevation areas where there's a little bit of area to camp. And so you got to walk through the swamp between those sections. So anyway, you'll be seeing some other pictures as we go through the details about backpacking. So first of all, let's talk about the types of a hike. Well, there's day hikes, which is a lot of what we do with the Sierra Club. We have day hikes. That's pretty self-explanatory what that is. Then we have section hikes. And the section hike would be what we're talking about today, pretty much. Would be just a multi-day hike where we are trying to complete a certain section of a trail or an area, and it would require some backpacking and primitive camping. And then there's what they call a lash, which means it stands for long-assed section hike. Pardon my French, but that's the term they all use, the hikers use. So that would be a section hike that would be, many weeks. And to me, the difference between a section hike and a lash would be the need to resupply. So most of our backpacking trips, well, all the backpacking trips we've taken with Sierra Club that I have led have all been small 3-day, 4-day, 2-day section hikes. And we bring everything we need with us on that journey, and we don't have to stop and go into town and resupply or send mail boxes to ourselves to resupply. So that's what you get into with a long-ass section hike or a through hike. Through hike was point to point, end to end on a major trail, like Appalachian Trail going from Georgia to Maine, or in the case of Florida Trail going from the Everglades to Pensacola. This is a picture of Hopkins Prairie in the Ocala National Forest. So as you can see, another very different look. This is a dry prairie, which we have a lot of in Florida, which many people don't know. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about when we talk about planning a hike is navigation. So how do we find out where the trail is? How do we find out where the camping spots are? How do we find out the mileage? And all that data we need in order to plan a hike and also to just hike a hike has to do with navigation. And there are several tools we use in Florida for that. And one of them is the Florida Trail Guide. And another one is the Florida Trail Data Book. And then you can also get hard copy maps, Florida Trail maps, official Florida Trail maps. And the tool of choice these days is Guthook, which is an app which has these trails on it. So we'll be talking about each one of these individually. Another good resource is a Facebook group called Florida Trail Hikers. This is invaluable because you can get real-time information from other folks that are out on the hike, out hiking the trail and have very recent experience with the trail. This picture here is of Camel Lake, which is in the western end of Apalachicola National Forest, which is out in the eastern panhandle of Florida. Beautiful sunset over that lake. Okay, so what is the Florida Trail Guide? It's a book. It has trail data in it. So it's got all the mileage data, you know, from end to end, all the different waypoints, the mileage of each waypoint, what you could expect, what are the water sources, where are the campsites, and a lot of just really good inside information about what to look out for and how to plan. And they have different sections on just describing trail towns, where you get resupplies, you know, where to stay when you go off the trail if you're doing a through hike. And there's a lot of interesting historical and environmental facts as well. So it's a really great book to pick up. I just really recommend it. The author is active in hiking the trails, and you know, you see her at gatherings, and she's really knowledgeable about the trail, and she's a really good writer. I really recommend picking up this book. The second resource is a Florida Trail Data Book. You can get this hard copy off the Florida Trail Association website, which is floridatrail.org. And this just gives you the raw data, you know, the mileage, the waypoints, you know, where you can get water, where you can camp, and the mileage in the section. And this, you don't really need to buy the hard copy. You can download them section by section from the floridatrail.org website. And I'll show you what that looks like. See, this is what it looks like. It's very simple, very easy to use. Not a lot of description, but you've got your major descriptions of the different waypoints on the trail, and then the distance between the waypoints, and then your south to north distance. This is within the section. This isn't the total mileage on the trail. And then your north to south. So this is a region that has 219 miles in it. So that's handy to have. It's always good to have a backup when you're hiking. So just in case there's issues with your phone or you run out of batteries or whatever, you have hard copy backup. So this is a good one to bring for the section that you're hiking. The third resource is the actual hard copy maps for the Florida Trail. And you can get these as well from the Florida Trail Association website, floridatrail.org. And so this one has maps, has topography, not that there's a lot of topography in Florida, but you can see where a little bit where the rivers and the swamps are, and then where the dry land is. And you can definitely see all the roads and get a good sense of where you are from this. You have the different waypoint symbols, like where you would camp, where there's water, this W, where you could park. And then they've got these waypoint signs here. See where it says 11, 9, 11, 10. What this does is this references back to the this data book. You see how it says waypoint 19-3? Well, that corresponds to these red callouts on the map. Okay. So those are good to have as a backup as well. But what we all just live and die by these days is the Guthook app. And this is an app that's available for many, many major trails throughout America and I guess the world. So the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, Benton MacKaye Trail, Florida Trail. They've got the entire Florida Trail in there. You can buy it by sections. You get the map, the app for free, and you buy the maps you need. And so then they're relatively inexpensive. And you can buy sections, or you can get a package deal where you just buy all sections of the Florida Trail. And so this is really handy because you could, obviously you'll carry it while you're hiking, and you click this little GPS button, and then it'll show your position along the trail with a little blinking light, just like it would on, Google Maps or something when you're driving in your car. And so it's really handy to know. Sometimes within Florida, it's not obvious where this trail is all the time. It's marked with an orange blaze, which is a vertical stripe that's marked usually on trees, sometimes on other objects like fence posts and things. So you look for those orange blazes, but they're not always, within sight. So sometimes, and this trail is not as well used as, say, the Appalachian Trail, where it's really, most sections, it's very hard to get lost. It's pretty obvious where the trail is. So sometimes it's kind of hard to find that next orange blaze, and maybe the trail isn't clear where it's going. And so you can see on your GPS where you're getting off the trail, and then just keep walking around till you find you're back onto it. And it's just kind of good confirmation that you're, not wasting time hiking in the wrong direction. And then they have these different waypoints as well. And so you could click on a waypoint. Like if I clicked on this symbol here, that's for a shelter. It brings up a little window, and then that window will give you a description of what's, what that shelter is like, maybe where water sources are, maybe what type of shelters are there, whether they have a picnic table, do they have a fire ring? Okay, so all the essentials you need to know. And then the other nice thing about this is it's a social app as well. So other hikers will leave notes. So maybe here, someone will say, well, the access to the river was blocked off and we couldn't get to the water. Or, someone left a ton of trash here. There's a lot of weekend campers here, a lot of local campers. So maybe you don't want to stop here because it can get crazy on the weekends. All kinds of information that's really helpful, again, because it's coming from other hikers that are actually experiencing the trail. So this is an incredible app to use. And the way we use it with planning, of course, is, if I wanted to I've got to figure out, well, where am I going to park, to get started on the trail? I can't just leave a car in the middle of the wilderness. So there's parking areas. So first of all, I'd locate a parking area. I want to hike this section of Suwannee. So here's a parking place. Let me start there. And then I could see where the next parking is. And then maybe I could see, well, the mileage here is, I'm making up a number, 835. And the mile marker down here is 870. So I now have 35 miles. And that's pretty good. Maybe that's a good 3-day or 4-day hike for me, et cetera, right? And then I can see I've got a camping spot in the middle. So how many miles is it to that campsite? Is there water there or not? Okay, there's not water. I've got to pick it up from where? How many miles I got to carry that water? All that information is really right here at your fingertips. So it's just an incredible resource. So that's what I recommend you get. Okay, so that's the navigation tools. Next, you want to determine your mileage requirements. So if you're hiking with a group, you need to think about, what are the capabilities of your group? how many miles can people do comfortably? And I tend to go conservatively. If it's just me, of course, I don't hike alone, but if it's me and another hiker I know really well, then we'll know what our pace is. We'll know what we want to do. We'll know if we want to push it, on a certain hike, or we just want to have a nice, relaxing hike. But you need to think about, what is your capabilities, and it's a safety issue as well. You don't want to hike beyond your ability. You want to do what you are capable of doing. Otherwise, you tend to get tired, and then you start to make mistakes. So think about what your average mileage might be and decide on your hike based on that. Also think about terrain. Again, we don't have elevation in Florida, so you don't have to worry about that, but if you're in the Appalachians, of course, doing 5 miles across a ridge line is a little different than doing 5 miles where you've got, 2,100 feet of elevation to deal with. So in Florida, that translates into, are you going to be walking through shin deep water or, thigh deep water? Or are you going to be walking through a nice cool forest with pine surface, very easy, soft terrain to walk through? Or is it going to be mud? Or is it going to be exposed to sun, for 20 miles, in 89-degree weather? So all that you think out, as well as, of course, if you're expecting very bad rain storms where you may need to stop. So all those things to me need to be considered when you're talking about how many miles you can do a day. And then, of course, I talk about how many days you want to go out. And that's pretty obvious. So what you can afford to do, how time you can get off from work, or how many days you just want to be out on the trail, and how much does your group want to do. And some of the group hikes that I've done for the Sierra Club, we've done 3 or 4 day hikes, but not everybody can do all 3 or 4 days. So I've many times provided a 2-day option. So that's another thing I had to plan into it, was giving folks like an off ramp, an exit 2 days into the hike, even though our total hike might be 3 or 4 days. And then you also want to know how many hikers are going, because not all camp sites or camping areas or shelters can, accommodate, a large number of hikers. So you need to think about that. So if you have, I don't really like to take backpacking trips with 30 people, but I don't think most of the campsites on the Florida Trail would accommodate 20 or 30 people. So you really need to think that out. You may have 10 or 11 tent sites as a max average. So anyway, so those are all things to think about when you're thinking about your route and your mileage requirements. And the picture here is of what's called the Palm Cathedral, which is a beautiful palm, completely, totally 100% palm forest. And it's actually, believe it or not, in the Big Bend of Florida, where, the peninsula turns west. And it's in an area called the St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge. Beautiful, beautiful forest to walk through. Okay, next we need to think about resource requirements. So plan your campsites. And so you have to think about, are there fees for these campsites, and how do you pay those fees? Many of them you pay on site at like an Iron Ranger, as they're called, where it's just the honor system and you leave an envelope. Sometimes you need to reserve in advance. So I'll talk about this a little bit in detail in a minute, but there's all different requirements here for different areas you might be going. Think about your water sources. Water is an issue, believe it or not, in Florida, mostly because you need a lot of water to hike Florida. It's generally hot during the day, particularly even during the winter. So you need to keep hydrated for sure. And there are some areas that are just too wet. You're walking through water, you know, you get tired of the water, but other areas you can go through where it just dries right up, and it can be difficult to find water. So you need to think that through ahead of time. And sometimes maybe you need to pre-cache some water at certain areas along the way. So you need to think about where you can get access to the trail with a car or close to the trail with a car and be able to get the water in and then cache it. That's not a normal thing you have to do, but it does come up. So you need to think about whether you're going to have enough water based upon the mileage that you've carved out for yourself. And you need to think out the parking. Some areas you might be able to park on the side of a road, but maybe your car wouldn't be there when you come back. So think about, you know, security, think about whether you're actually allowed to park there or you're going to get towed. Think about, you know, if there's enough parking there, and whether there's any fees involved in the parking. Then think about how you get from one trailhead to the other. So you'd start at one end, you go 30 miles or 25 miles or towards the other end, and then you're at the other end, and now how do you get back to your cars? So typically we have a group and we'll self-shuttle. So we'll leave some cars at one end and then combine the remaining cars to go to the other end and then get started. But there are shuttles, not so common on the Florida Trail, certainly as the Appalachian Trail, where there's a whole booming, ecosystem of shuttle drivers. But if you need shuttles to hire, you need to take that out ahead of time, obviously, and make reservations and someone ready to pick you up when you need to be picked up. And then think about the time it might take to drive from the end of the trailhead where you're leaving some cars to the beginning of the trailhead where you're going to leave the rest of the cars, because you're going to need to figure that into your timing. Some of them, you know, I mean, you might be walking only 20 miles or 25 miles, but because it's so rural, it might take, I mean, I've had hikes where it's taken an hour and a half because the roads are so rural and out of the way to get from one trailhead to the other, even though we only went 25 miles by foot. So you need to think that out and put that into your timing of your planning. Then there's regulations. There's a lot of different governing authorities in Florida on these wild areas. So there's state parks, there's national parks, there's wildlife management areas, et cetera, and so on. And so you need to see if permits and fees are required to camp in these areas. There's not any that I can think of that actually have a permit to have to enter the area. I don't think they could control that, but there's permits that are needed to camp, and then fees associated with those permits, or just plain fees for camping. And also there's parking fees as well. The other thing we deal with in Florida is that hunting season is kind of parallel to your hiking season, because that's when everyone wants to be outdoors in Florida. So you need to check to see if you're hiking during a hunting season, which is probably going to happen, but you need to know anyway, because if it's during hunting season, you need to think out, whether you really want to be in that area. In most cases, it's fine, but you definitely then want to wear blaze orange, and that's a very visible, very large section of your clothing. You want to be that hunter orange, that blaze orange, so people will see you. Okay, and this area, this picture is of a beautiful area in St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge called the Ring Dyke Campsite. And this is one of the few that's really on saltwater. This is a salt marsh. And so again, with water, this is a consideration because most of this is brackish water. So you need to bring your water in through this little section, but it's just a gorgeous place to camp, and the stars are beautiful at night. Again, very different than some of the other pictures you've seen. Okay, so as far as hunting season goes, you need to go to the Florida Wildlife website, and so these are the links to those websites. I think I'm just going to skip through. I could show you this if we have time at the end. I'll go back to this, but it's pretty easy to navigate through if you follow these directions. But you just need to get onto that website, and then you need to get the easiest way is just to get the brochure for that wildlife management area. There's all the areas that they govern, the Florida Wildlife Commission governs is called wildlife management areas. And so each of them has different rules, different hunting seasons. And it's very specific, but if you identify your WMA first, and then you go to this link and you just search for that WMA, you'll get a PDF, or you can do it right online, and you can check what the dates are for the hunting seasons. And particularly you're concerned about gun. I mean, they have, archery and various other types of hunting, but you're mainly concerned about general gun season and deer season, a little bit maybe they have small game season. So anytime they're using a gun, you definitely want to be wearing blaze orange when you're out there. So that's something you really should do for every hike in Florida. And if you can't find your WMA, you can look it up on a map, but if there just isn't one, you can always go to the Florida Wildlife Commission's page for the hunting season dates. And there's a link to click to get on the zone map to find your zone. And that's just 4 zones, A, B, C, and D. So we're in zone C, for example, but if you're going to South Florida, it'd be zone D, I think. So you need to find that zone, and then you can just go back to that hunting season page and you can scroll down and you'll see the dates for that zone, and that will cover you if you can't find the specific WMA. As far as permits, there's 4 areas that I know of that you will need permits to camp. Seminole State Forest. For that one, you need to just get on the website and call the number and do it over the phone. There's St. Mark's, which we talked about. This one, you just call the visitor center at the National Wildlife Refuge. And in the past, you needed to pick up the permit in person. So you need to get out to the visitor center, get the permit, and then go to wherever your trailhead would be. Some of this is changing with COVID, so it's good to call and find out, because a lot of these visitor centers are actually physically closed, even though they have staffing by phone. Eglin Air Force Base is another long section of Florida Trail out in the Panhandle. So you can call the number on their website, which is eglin.isportsman.net. That's their recreation website. And then you have to pick it up from the recreation office on the base. Kissimmee, that section is managed by the South Florida Water Management District, and you need to get a special use license. So you go to that link that I've got here, and I'll be posting this video so you can go back and get this information off of the video. And so you need to get this special use license. That's all done on the web. You need to create a password and a username, and then you get on there and you get these special user licenses, and it will give you a PDF permit that you'd use for each parking area and each campsite that you're going to use within the Kissimmee River area. As far as fees, Ocala National Forest has some fees for parking in some of the campsites. Econ-Lockhatchee down in Orlando has some as well. They're around, but you don't have to pre-pay those. They're just feeding the Iron Ranger, but it's good to know about so that you can inform people in your group what their fees will be once they get on site. So for that, you just do a web search on the name of the park you're going to, like Ocala National Forest, and then you find their website, and then you'll get the information from there. Okay, safety. Check weather, obviously. Plan around that, but also check as you get closer. Check the water levels. There are many rivers that have flooding, and the trail goes through those flooding areas. Any news of water quality issues like industrial accidents and algae blooms and sewage fills, yeah, all kinds of stuff happens in our bodies of water, unfortunately. So you need to be aware of what's going on in the area before you get out there, because we depend on these water sources. It's always good to have another plan, a backup plan, plan B, contingency. So it's something else to keep in mind. Again, alternate trailheads, ways to get off the trail, people who can come to your aid, etc. This picture is of the Kissimmee Prairie Preserve State Park. So this is a dry prairie, beautiful dry prairie down Central Florida. Okay, so as far as water levels, the water's managed in each section of Florida by a water management district. So you just go to the website for the water management district in the area you're hiking, and you find and click the level for the water levels, the link for the water levels, and they'll also tell you what the flood stage is. And if you have any questions, just call their office. But you should check that out, because I'm planning something in early December down in Kissimmee, another section of Kissimmee that I haven't hiked. And the campsite I was planning to use, I just went on the site, and it's closed because the river's flooded right next to it. So you got to check on that stuff, because sometimes it's really impassable and you have to take an alternate route. Okay, so then just the prep work, you want to just write everything down, communicate your plan to your group. What are the trailheads? Where are you going to camp? What's the mileage? What are the water sources? Sometimes if they're strangers, again, this is more like being a group leader like I was. You want to talk to the participants before to make sure they know what they're doing and their ability, and you can gauge how to set the hike up. In extreme cases, maybe you want to scout the trail. I mean, as the leader of an outing at the Sierra Club, we always have to scout the trail. So we have to get out there and check it out ourselves and see what the conditions are and make sure it's what we thought it was or it's advertised to be. But, with a less formal trip, if you've been in the area before and you have other sources to find out current conditions, perhaps you can skip that. Another thing to think about would be gear checks. If you're going with less experienced campers, you may want to check them to see if they've got the proper equipment. I did a video, which is up on there. I think Sierra Club has posted it, of how to pack for a backpacking trip, which gear you need to take. But anyway, that's a good thing to do, is do a gear check with your group. And then just continuing monitoring water levels, weather, all the information related to your hike right up to the start of the hike to make sure everything's still a go. And this picture here is the beautiful Suwannee River. And again, very different from some of the other pictures we've seen. So after you've prepped, then the next final thing to do is just go. And this is the very beginning of the Florida Trail, the Oasis Ranger Station.